Welcome back to the show today. We are talking about the NBA Draft Lottery. What is the NBA Draft Lottery? It's how the NBA decides who gets what draft pick, or the order of the draft. And it's just like Powerball for all the degenerate gamblers watching. It's decided by a bunch of ping pong balls. 4 ping pong balls to be exact. There are 1,001 different combinations that can be drawn. Each combination is given to a team in the lottery. So each team has 50 to 100 combinations assigned to them. The lottery ball machine is made by the best company there is. It's made by the Smart Play company. It's pretty state of the art, says the NBA. The best money can buy. So they mix up the balls for 20 seconds and then they draw a ball. Then they wait another 10 seconds, they draw another ball, and so on until they have 4 balls. And after 4 balls have been drawn, whatever team has that combination, that pick goes to. There's a representative from every team watching all the balls get drawn. A lot of times it's a player from the team, sometimes it's an executive, sometimes it's a relative of a coach or something. It doesn't really matter. They don't do anything, they just watch. And what's interesting is there's one person who releases the ball, and then there's one guy that's keeping time, and he's not watching the ball. He's just the timekeeper. And then there's a hired gun from Ernst Young, the accounting firm, who actually stuffs the envelopes with the team logos on them. He's just there to make sure no funny business goes down. So for a brief moment in time, the only people who know who got what draft pick is the team itself and the guy from the accountant firm. Also, this actually happening is not televised. So then there's the NBA Draft Lottery ceremony, which is really weird. The actual lottery has already happened in a back room somewhere, and that wasn't even televised. So the NBA accountant comes out and he gives the envelopes with the team's names on them to Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum. Mark Tatum is basically a protege of Adam Silver. He's probably going to be the next commissioner. Sort of an Obi-Wan Kenobi, Luke Skywalker type thing. Everyone gets Star Wars references, right? He goes on stage and he reads the results of the lottery. This isn't the NBA draft. This is just deciding who gets what pick. This is just a live reading of lottery tick numbers done by ESPN. And high stakes gambling on television does pretty well. But what makes the draft lottery weird and frankly a lot better is there's a representative of each team up on the dais behind a podium. They're just up there so we can all stare at them. They don't do anything up there. They don't say anything. All they do is react to what pick they got. Because when they read the names of the teams off the card, they read from 14th to 1st. So for the first couple picks read off, all the representatives look really pissed because they're learning they got the 14th or 13th pick in the draft. Meanwhile, all the other representatives start smiling real big. They're cheesing because they know as each pick gets read off, they're getting a little closer to the number 1 pick. Until the deputy commissioner reads off the number 2 pick and everyone knows who got the first pick. For example, in the 2023 NBA lottery, which was probably the most coveted first pick overall of all time, with Victor Wembanyama being in the draft class, we've got the son of the owner of the San Antonio Spurs. I forget his name. Here's his reaction knowing that the Charlotte Hornets got the number 2 pick, acknowledging the foregone conclusion that Victor Wembanyama would be wearing a Spurs hat on draft night. So what are the odds of getting the number 1 pick in the NBA draft? Well, that depends on how bad your team sucks. In this case, it's good to suck in the NBA. First of all, there are 14 teams in the NBA draft lottery. They're all the teams that didn't make the playoffs that year. The 16 teams that did make the playoffs, they get picks 15 through 30, in order by record. For instance, the Thunder will have the 30th pick in the draft this year because they had the best record. The Heat will have the 15th pick in the draft because they have the worst record of all the teams that made the playoffs. The worse your team was during the season, the better odds you have at getting a high draft pick. Here's the table of lottery odds. It's kind of hard to fit on the screen. So it's kind of interesting, every team in the lottery does have a chance at getting a 1 through 4 pick. But for a team like the Atlanta Hawks, it's pretty unlikely. The odds of them getting the number 1 pick is less than 1%. More than likely, they're getting the 14th pick in the draft. It's a 96% chance. Not that they care because their pick belongs to the Spurs anyway. So let's look at the teams that are more likely to get the number 1 pick this year. We'll start with the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz had the worst record in the NBA this year, so the lowest pick they could possibly get is 5. The Wizards had the 2nd worst record in the league, so the lowest pick that they can get is the 6th pick in the draft. The Hornets had the 3rd worst, the lowest they can get is 7. But all 3 have the same odds of getting picks 1, 2, and 3. So it's obviously good to be really good in the NBA, but it's also kind of good to be absolutely horrible. I've already talked about this a few times, but we need to talk about my least favorite part of the NBA, trading picks. Oftentimes, teams will have already traded their pick in the NBA draft. For instance, this year the Rockets have the Suns pick. They didn't even get the pick from the Suns, they got it from the Nets. And the Nets traded it to the Rockets. But here is where it gets really confusing and honestly kind of annoying. Have you heard of protected picks? That's when a team trades their pick, but they put a contingency on it. If the lottery happens and the pick is actually good, they get their pick back. It's takesies backsies. They don't have to give it to the team they traded it to, which personally I hate. For instance, the Oklahoma City Thunder have the Philadelphia 76ers pick this year. So if their pick falls within 1 through 6, the Sixers get to keep it. So when the Sixers realized they weren't going to do anything this year and they were going to suck because their team was downright shameful and they couldn't even win if they were trying to win, they decided to try to lose just to make sure they had the highest likelihood of getting a 1 through 6 pick so they wouldn't have to trade their pick to Oklahoma City. That's why they shut down Maxey, they shut down Embiid, and they shut down Paul George. They started guys like Gerson Yabusele, Quentin Grimes, and guys you hadn't even heard of. The same thing happened to the Mavs a few years ago. Coach Jason Kidd was instructed to sit Luka during the last game of the season to ensure that they wouldn't make the playoffs, just so they could keep their draft pick that year. And it worked because they didn't make the playoffs and they got Derek Lively in the draft. This is the most annoying part about the NBA. Potentially, you could go to a basketball game where both teams are actively trying to lose the game, and that is a sin against God. So the NBA draft lottery used to be wildly unsophisticated. As a matter of fact, until 1985, it was decided by a literal coin toss between the two worst teams in the league. Then they changed it to an actual lottery because word was teams were tanking for Akeem Olajuwon in 1984, which I'm sure was true, and they did. The new system was a glass sphere with a bunch of envelopes in it, and inside the envelope were all the teams' logos who didn't make the playoffs that year. As you can imagine, this was right for salty fans to call rigged. So when this was introduced in 1985, David Stern, the commissioner, pulls out 3 envelopes from the sphere. And what do you know? The Knicks get the #1 pick. They eventually selected Patrick Ewing, who everyone wanted. Listen to the audience in the room when they hear the Pacers got the 2nd pick.
The 2nd pick in the 1985 NBA draft goes to the Indiana Pacers.
People say the envelope with the Knicks logo on it was frozen. So when David Stern was feeling around in the sphere, he knew which one to pick. I don't know if this is true. How could I tell if an envelope was frozen from watching an old clip? But my uncle told me about another theory, which is the dinged quarter theory. This feels way more plausible, and I kind of believe it. Look at the way the guy puts this envelope into the sphere. He throws it against the side of the sphere, and he doesn't do that with any of the other envelopes. But here's why it was rigged. The first envelope that David Stern pulls out has a dinged corner on it. And here's what he says.
The team whose logo is in this envelope will have the 1st pick in the NBA draft.
Okay, that was the first envelope. Wouldn't the first envelope you pull out be the 3rd pick? Wouldn't you just go in order of how you reveal the pick? 3rd, 2nd, 1st instead? And there's motive here. In 1984, the NBA needed some juice. It was losing ground in the media landscape to the MLB and the NFL. So putting Patrick Ewing, a player that everyone knew who had just won the NCAA tournament and been the NCAA most outstanding player, putting that guy in the biggest city in the United States, the largest market, was worth rigging the system for. Gotta do what you gotta do, I guess. There are a lot of NBA draft conspiracies. People think the Cleveland Cavaliers getting the 1st pick overall in 2003 was a conspiracy. It was rigged because LeBron James was in the draft. He was from Akron, Ohio, right outside of Cleveland. Having a local boy revitalize the franchise was good for ratings. The thing is, though, the Cavs did have the worst record in the league. Pretty likely it was going to happen. It doesn't really seem like you have a case to say it was rigged. Very likely the draft lottery was rigged in 2008, though. The Chicago Bulls got the #1 pick, and Derrick Rose was in the draft. He grew up in Inglewood, a neighborhood in Southside Chicago. He was the best player in the draft, and the Bulls hadn't been good since MJ left. Also, this is the NBA's 3rd biggest market. And the thing that gives this conspiracy a little bit of credibility is the Bulls weren't that bad. They finished 33-49 the previous season. They had less than a 2% chance of getting the #1 pick. Pretty fishy. A lot of people think that Anthony Davis and Zion Williamson going to New Orleans was sort of rigged, because historically the Pelicans have had a pretty bad franchise. They sell the least merch, they sell the least tickets, which may be the case, but in both those drafts, the Pelicans were really bad. So good luck proving any tomfoolery went down. I think more likely that the 2023 draft was a little bit rigged with Victor Wembanyama. Granted, I know the Spurs did have the 2nd worst record in the league, but here's a picture of Victor Wembanyama as a kid wearing a Tony Parker jersey. The Spurs were his favorite team. 2 of his fellow countrymen were playing on the Spurs while he was coming up. And I'm sure the NBA was way more keen on him going to the Spurs over a team like the Rockets or the Wizards. But ultimately, if I had to guess, I'd assume none of these NBA conspiracy theories are actually true. Just because all these conspiracy theories involve multiple people being in on it. And if there's one thing I know about people is they have a very difficult time keeping a secret. Alright, thank you for being here. Thank you for liking the last video. The last video did well because you liked it. The Patreon is live. Get a weekly podcast for $2 a month. That's $4.50, not too bad. And there's something else I forgot to say. Maybe leave a comment. I'll reply. Be good to your mom, eat a corn dog.